My name is Greg Prentice, and this is my cross-gendered leisure activity for Recreation 3202. This project involved choosing an activity that is socially thought of as being for the opposite gender. In my case, I decided to have an all-male slumber party. Unfortunately, this is not us. This is us. This is myself and three friends, all of whom came to my slumber party. This is us in our natural habitat, jerseys on, in the rain and wind, at a Raider game, ready to watch the Chiefs get smacked. This is us now. We decided to gather together a collection of things that we generally thought that women would tend to do at a slumber party, including watching some romantic comedies or otherwise girly movies, eating junk food, and just hanging out with each other. Like traditional chips, lasagna, we even baked brownies, as well as girly drinks such as wine coolers, which I was blackmailed into bringing or else nobody would come. Traditionally, men would see this type of activity as far too feminine for them. For a group of men to get together and spend the night together, talking about a romantic movie, about each other, or whatever else we could think of, just seemed like something that never even crossed their minds. One of our articles, Gains and Gaps, tells us that women and men are set in their own specific roles by society. Women are pigeonholed by society, even under the guise of something else. For example, the article Cult of the Body tells us that the new fad for women Olympians is to pose nude, whereas the problem before was that they were not getting enough media coverage. This type of exposure obviously gets them more media coverage, but it does not really solve the root problem. Instead focuses on a different aspect of women, which bleeds into other areas of society. For us, where we come from tells us how we think people should be and act. In the case of a slumber party, it has always seemed to be a much more feminine activity. The girls get together, do each other's nails, and sleep in the same room. Honestly, it was difficult for me to get a group of guys together to do this. I had to basically bribe them with food. Today we are more accepting of different ways of seeing gender and how people act, but that won't change how you think if you were raised seeing your girl cousins or sisters having slumber parties, and you were supposed to camp outside with the boys. And excuse me as I explode, the girl who wrote the essay describes anger and frustration at the role she feels her mom has been given by society, and strives to change it, and yet ends up the same way as her mother, because that is how she was raised. She wanted to share all of the housework with her husband, but instead of teaching him how she thought was the proper way to do things, she instead took it all upon herself, and was internally angry at him, even though he did try and help, and she denied him. Her actions show that even though she realized that the world could be different for her than it was for her mother, the way she was raised was such a big part of her that she repeated the process, albeit watered down, and eventually realized the path she was on and was able to alter it. It is the same way for us today with activities such as slumber parties. Girls were taught to be sensitive, and to talk about their feelings with each other, and try to be pretty, and it was acceptable and even encouraged for young girls to get together at slumber parties, both historically and presently. I personally have not had a slumber party since I was a young child, and even then it was called a sleepover. It was an effort made to differentiate the two words, and it was made understood that a sleepover was for the boys, and a slumber party was for the girls, and the two words were not interchangeable. We played outside until we were called in, played video games until we got yelled at to be quiet and go to sleep, and then we told ghost stories or pulled pranks on each other. I believe that both presently and in the past, slumber parties were not an attractive activity that for a male, if only because the girls did it, and you were not supposed to be like the girls. That is really not all that different today. These are some of the examples of how we spent our time. We got ourselves a couple of movies, something we felt a typical group of girls might like to get together and watch, and there's only so much I can pretend that they made me get something with attractive girls, even if it is a girly plot. Also, there's one of the tables with all of the junk food and stuff on it that people will be getting to eat. Here are some examples of the stuff I bribed people to come with. Homemade sweet potato fries, cupcake brownies, and lasagna. I had to get them to come somehow. As I was saying before, much of how we view what men and women should do is a social construct. That is to say, it is passed on to us by those in our society whom we learn from. And Just Do It, one of our readings, talks about how in prior years people have talked about wholesome participation, especially for women. That type of thinking even went so far as to believe that physical activities such as sports were harmful to a woman's health and could harm the reproductive system. This meant that women growing up during that time believed that there were certain activities for a woman that would be socially acceptable, such as gathering female friends together and gossiping or doing other traditional feminine activities. Both Gains and Gaps says that while the primary interactions for people remains the family, the second is that of friends. The article goes on to explain how while men's friendships tend to be more centered around activities than around the relationships themselves, women are opposite. They tend to be much closer emotionally and want security and support from the relationships with their friends. When applying this basic understanding of how friendships generally work for the different genders, we can see why men would not find a slumber party as attractive an activity as women would. In our society, there are also what are known as structural constraints, which are explained in the article Both Gains and Gaps as factors that are not associated with relationships as such, but rather either increase or decrease interest in an activity because of any number of things, which in the case of slumber parties for men is that it is seen by society as something unmanly, which is undesirable for us. Going into the historical to the present, I see slumber parties as something which have not changed much in frequency for those that actually take part in them, which would be women especially in the past, and men today, but it is really not seen by the public. This is because today, as in years past, women are encouraged at a young age to be sensitive and intimate with other young girls, and a slumber party with a group of their friends is a tradition that their mothers and other female relatives most likely took part in their youths, and want to pass down that experience to their daughters, while the men in the family, who may not have had that experience when they were younger, have nothing to pass on to their sons or nephews in that same line. The first impression that this activity gave me was one of social constructs, and how we are pointed at activities by the media based on our gender. For example, the list of male activities when pointed out to both my male and female friends is a list that is full of things that we all enjoy. When looking at the female activity list, however, even my female friends, some of which are traditional girly girls, thought they absolutely paled in comparison. In retrospect, I think it was a bit of a mistake telling my friends what was on the list for the traditional male activities, because that was all they could talk about doing for the next several days. It was a struggle to get guy friends, even when we were all actually close, to have a slumber party. It was something that they saw as not fun at all, not interesting. Sure, they liked to stay at each other's places until the wee hours of the morning playing video games or watching one of the Saw movies, but why would they want to sleep there? Why would they enjoy watching a romantic comedy with no girl to hang off of their arm? For me, this is where the interpersonal conflicts that Gains and Gaps discuss really made an impact. In the end, I had to promise to make food, such as sweet potato fries and brownies, as well as buy some type of drink. We met in the middle on the drinks on wine coolers, which we voted unanimously as the girliest drink that would make sure nobody got drunk. During this activity, I realized that the difference between men and women are actually more subtle than gaping. Once everybody got over the fact that they were going to be spending the night together, people started to actually have fun. We watched Mean Girls and then later on The Lake House, and afterwards talked about how we're looking at each other's relationships and how everybody was doing. Gains and Gaps says that women are taught to be much more emotionally intimate with each other than men are. But once you forget about what you're supposed to do, actually doing whatever you feel like can be a pretty enjoyable experience. As for the slumber party itself, I could say that I enjoyed it, but I would probably not do it again. What seemed at first like a simple, easy, and cheap activity turned into a bit more of a problematic day of getting everybody together, making them all happy about the situation, and just getting everybody to come in the first place. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that this has helped enlighten you toward gender differences and similarities, both past and present, and what we are heading towards.